I found this place about 2 years ago, but I never told anybody about it. So you'll be safe here.
Safe? From what?
The apes, of course. I'll be back as soon as I can.
Apes?
Hello and welcome to Ape Nation, your number one source for all things Planet of the Apes on YouTube. My name is Josh, and today I am giving my review of episode 1 of the short-lived 1974 TV series, Planet of the Apes. If you like what I do here and want to show your support, be sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. This will, of course, be the first of 14 reviews following every single episode of the show, all leading to a full series review later this year. That one will be much more in-depth and filled with the history of the show and all of its finer details, similar to my reviews of each of the movies, as opposed to these reviews, which will be a bit leaner, a bit more general, and will be a lot closer to my spoiler-free review of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which you can watch on this channel if you haven't already. I should also let you know, and I've said it before, but I just want to make sure everyone knows where I stand. This is in fact my first time watching this series in full. I saw a few episodes of the show probably 10 to 15 years ago, and I barely remember anything that happened outside of Roddy McDowell being in it and the two astronaut characters. Beyond that, I don't really remember anything as far as what the story is, who the villain is, what actually happens. So for all intents and purposes, this is a completely fresh viewing experience for me. So that is how I'm approaching these reviews, as if it is a brand new show. I think it will give me the opportunity to kind of just treat this as I would treat any modern TV show weekly review series, as well as giving you all the opportunity to follow along if you want to. Speaking of, for those who do want to follow along with my reviews, who haven't seen the show or have seen the show and just want to rewatch it, I've put a link down in the description where you can watch the show for free. It's completely legal. You don't have to worry about anything. It's not on any streaming services, unfortunately, and it's pretty hard to come by when it comes to getting it on DVD, but fortunately there is an option down below. You can watch it, either you can download the episodes or you can watch them on your computer or your iPad or your phone or whatever you want to do, but the option is there for you to check out the show if you'd like to. And one more thing to note, when it comes to spoilers, each episode I will be talking spoilers in each review. I'm not going to give much of a warning. I'm just going to talk openly about each episode. So if you want my general thoughts, I'm going to give those at the beginning of the review for a minute or so, and then beyond that, everything may or may not include spoilers. So you've been warned that if you are watching these reviews and you haven't seen the show and you want to go in as completely blind as possible, just watch the episode beforehand, or just watch the first minute or so of my review, and then I will let you know when I'm getting into more detailed territory. So with all of that said, let's dive into episode 1 of Planet of the Apes, Escape from Tomorrow. Two astronauts survive a crash landing on a planet where intelligent apes rule over humans. The men find that their own intelligence challenges the apes' superiority and puts their lives in danger. So after watching this episode, first time I'd seen it in well over 10 years, didn't remember anything going in, but rewatching this episode for the first time in a long time, I gotta say, this is a surprisingly strong pilot episode. This is really a solid episode of TV just in general. I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed this. Overall, I think this does a great job at introducing our main characters, Verdon, Burke, and Galen, as well as our villain Urko, and we also have a character named Zaius, who is not the Zaius from the original movies, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But it does a really good job at introducing all of these characters and getting you to care, for the most part, about at least the main ones. It sets up each of their dynamics really well. You get introduced to how they interact with each other, what their relationships are going to be like, and how they're going to be explored. It also does a great job at explaining how the world at this point in the timeline works, or at least setting up some of those building blocks. I think that was really impressive to me. And so overall, I was really impressed by this opening episode. I like that we're taking place in the pre-1968 time period. It's not after battle, it's before the original movie, which I was actually completely surprised by. So I am excited to see where the rest of the story goes. And so overall, I thought it was a really good episode. So getting into some of my more detailed thoughts, I think the two main characters are really interesting and very quickly charismatic characters. I think Ron Harper and and James Naughton have a really fun chemistry between the two of them. And Burke, played by Naughton, is especially really likable. I liked his character a lot just from the get-go, so I'm already latched on to him, and I'm excited to see where he goes. Not to say I don't like Vernon as well, but his character really, I think, has a bit more of an optimism and a bit more of a charm to him that I resonated with, so I really like him. And I also just loved seeing Roddy McDowall again as an ape. I thought that was great to see, kind of tapped into that nostalgia I have for the original series, of course, but it's so cool getting to see him play a completely different type of character. Galen is not at all like Caesar. He's definitely not like Cornelius, although there are some similarities here and there, but he's a very much a different type of character. I'm excited to get to know more about him as the show goes on, and also get to see Roddy McDowall play that role in a much different way and see what else he can bring to the table that he hasn't already done with Cornelius and Caesar. And it is really cool to see the early generation of the original Planet of the Apes timeline. I think it was really fresh, and it was exciting to actually get to explore what that world looked like hundreds of years before apes became completely dominant and humans became completely, nothing, who didn't speak, who didn't do anything. This is still a point in time where apes and humans are definitely not equals. Apes are the superior species, but apes still treat humans like sentient creatures to a degree. Humans aren't seen as completely worthless at this point in time, almost, but not completely. And so I like seeing that part of the timeline explored a little bit. So that's something I'm really excited to see going forward in the show. The one thing that did kind of not bother me, but I was just curious about it, is if this takes place hundreds of years before Taylor lands and before ape society is fully thriving in the 1968 movie. I mean, ape society is already kind of thriving at this point. I think it would have been cool to see the clothing changed up a bit. Obviously, it was a 70s show. They were probably just reusing costumes from the original movies, so I get wanting to just do that to make it easier and to keep the budget down, but I just think it would have been cool to see maybe a different version of ape wardrobe and ape clothing, because chimps and orangutans and gorillas are all wearing the exact same thing in this time period that they are 900 plus years later in the 1968 movie. So that I thought was a little weird, but I understand why they probably did it, just to save money and to make things easier. And then also the makeup work in here, while it is definitely a clear step down from the earlier movies, it's still pretty good for a 1970s TV show. I was surprised at how overall it actually holds up compared to what they were doing in the movies. It's definitely a drop, but it's not too far of a drop, and so that I thought was pretty impressive. As for some of the other characters we get introduced to, we have Zeus, who I mentioned up top, who I think is an interesting character. I just think it's weird that they're using the same name as Dr. Zeus. There's not really a reason. He's just named Zeus because he's an orangutan. I don't know if maybe they were worried that no one would watch the show if there wasn't any familiar names, or if Zeus is just like a name that's passed on by orangutans, or maybe Dr. Zeus is actually like a descendant of this character that we'll find out. But I just thought it was a weird choice to give him the exact same name. But that aside, I do think the character is interesting, and I'm very curious about what exact type of role he's going to play throughout this story. I like the character. I think he is fascinating, and he's similar to Dr. Zeus in that he's not evil, but he's definitely not a good guy per se. And so I'm really fascinated by where they're going. And then speaking of evil, Urko, I think, has potential to be a really, really good villain. Just from the first episode alone, I'm already curious about where this guy's story's going and what arc he's going to go on, if any, or if he's just going to be more of a one-note bad guy. But even so, I like what we've seen of this guy so far. He is a surprisingly threatening and menacing villain. And so, like I said, I'm very interested in seeing what he has moving forward. I will say, as far as characters I was a little underwhelmed by, while I really liked the character of Pharaoh, I was disappointed that he was killed off so quickly. I thought he was really likable, and I really wanted to see more of who he was and learning more about where he comes from and his past. And also, I thought him as a character provided a really great opportunity to create an even more interesting dynamic between characters, because you have this human character who, as far as he knows, humans are nothing and have always been nothing, but now he has the chance to learn from these two humans who are from our time. And I thought that would have been really interesting to see explored further, but unfortunately he's killed off before we can ever get to that. So I was a little let down by that, but hopefully they still tap into some of that as the series progresses. And then a couple other things I really was impressed by was the way that the show is able to maintain that visual and audio aesthetic of the first two movies. It's obvious that there are shots from the 1968 movie that are reused for like establishing shots a couple of times, but it works, and it works really well. And I think the way that the production of the entire thing, the way it looks, even the sound design, the certain sound elements here and there, and the music, it it all plays well, and it feels like it is in that same exact world. It feels like it is continuing, expanding upon the world that we know. It looks like it sounds like it, and I really appreciated that. It continues that primitive but futuristic time, and so I'm very happy that they didn't have to cheapen that or get rid of that in any way, and they were able to recapture that for the TV show. And then as far as the story goes being set up so far, obviously it's very early on, so there hasn't really been a whole lot that's happened, but from what has happened in the world building especially, I was really into it. I think apes wanting to learn about human history is a really fascinating topic with what they're doing with Galen and him being so curious about everything and wanting to learn. I think that's a great angle, and it's obviously something that's very similar to what we just got in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and my hope is that in this show we get to see that aspect actually explored a bit more. So I'm wondering if in this TV show that's something that we get to see explored a bit more and discussed between characters a bit more. And I'm also wondering if maybe that was something that was inspiration for Kingdom in any way. And then before I finish this whole thing out, I will say just in general that I think it's setting up a potentially interesting and for me very exciting story with what we are left with at the end of this episode, with a really great trio of characters. We have Burke, we have Verdon, and now we have Galen all joining together and going off on what feels like a really exciting new adventure that will hopefully further the world that we know and will introduce us to a really great story. So I was left with a lot of excitement, and I was left ready to watch the next episode, and I think that's what a great pilot does, and this one did it. So I think this was a really solid first episode of the show. I really enjoyed it. I'm excited to see where the rest of the show goes, because of course the show did not get its full run. It was canceled after 14 episodes. I'm hoping that wherever this goes, it does eventually get wrapped up in some way and it's not left on a cliffhanger in episode 14, but we shall see. I really enjoyed this first episode, and I'm excited to watch and talk about episode 2 next week. But until then, let me know down in the comments what you thought of episode 1 of Planet of the Apes, the TV series. Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What were some of the things that stood out to you? What do you think of the characters? What do you think of Galen? What do you think of this as a trio? Where do you think the story's going if you haven't seen it already? If you have seen it already all the way through, do you think this episode does a good job of kicking things off for where they eventually go? I want to know all of your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for checking out today's video here on Ape Nation. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. I'll catch you in the next one, so until then, goodbye.